is flying with its only mate, an all-enduring spirit on the whiskey trail.
I think the don't overthink it's probably the best bit of advice.
Well, I mean, if we think about the history of this podcast, thinking about things is not something we've done a lot of.
No,
I think we should just slide very, very simply into episode 6 of series 5,
yes!
which we are.
Gordon, that last episode, by the way, lots of people. I was at Ayr Town Hall the other day. One of the hottest days of the year.
You just happened to be in Ayr Town Hall. Was there a reason you were there?
Pouring whiskies for the great Robbie's Dram Club, and one or two, fans of the podcast. You brushing shoulders of Hollywood royalty went down quite well. So that was a great episode last time we did it, but just a great time to be out and about in the whiskey world again. I know it's a cliche, everyone's saying it, but even in the hottest day of the year in Scotland, which is freezing cold for most people in the west coast of Australia or whatever.
Yes.
No one was complaining. Brilliant time.
No. And so you were down at that. Was that a good event? Did that go well?
Oh, great event. Yeah, great event. I think first pour's about 1 o'clock, last pour about 5:45, and just, great. I can only categorize it as great laughs and really good fun. The mood was just up another level.
And you genuinely came across some listeners?
They said they did. One gentleman said, I recognise the voice.
How funny.
I'm not Gordon Dundas. So that was great. It was great to hear some podcast and whiskey listeners.
Fabulous. Well, I know that this weekend, which is possibly, depending when this comes out, maybe last weekend, if you know what I mean, I'm in Dumfries at Dram Busters. So I'm going to be there, looking forward to that. And again, a great opportunity to get in amongst it and see what people are saying. So that's going to be great. The
good thing about Dram Busters, Gordon, I think it was January, we did an online tasting, or was it February? And people were saying, the online tastings, I don't know, not really. Now it's sort of opening up. Will people be wanting to do it? Dram Busters had 140 people on an online tasting with myself and Daniel Murphy, who has been on a previous podcast. So
did they have to 140 people in an online tasting having to listen to you?
That's right. And lucky people. So that was
very lucky. Just shows
you, Gordon.
Yeah.
There is that great appetite down there in Dumfries, which is the bottom left of Scotland as you look on it. Not a huge whiskey producing area, would you say?
No.
Although it's getting
Bladnoch down there is the biggest distillery in that part of the world. But I mean, it's very close to the English border, with very close to the Lake District. But great part of the world. And the big distillery down there, the most heard of one, is Bladnoch.
Yes. Well, Gordon, before we start, we'd like to have a wee look at the whiskey news. We've got Becky Paskin coming up later on in the show, some of our. Well, I love a good feature and I love a good challenge. So we've got a bit of
challenge.
Yes, a bit of fun coming up later on. But what are
you nosing there, Gordon?
I'm nosing a Benriach 12.
Nice.
46%. Oh, that's lovely.
I'm drinking a Glen Grant 10. Glen Grant, a distillery in Rothes, and if you've not seen it, all I would say, everybody, is you need to see the wonderful film done by who we had on last week, Chris Coates and Whiskey Magazine, on Dennis Malcolm, who is, I think is it 60 years at Glen Grant? I think it is. Yeah. The film's about Dennis, who's the most amazing gentleman, and he's been involved in Glen Grant for 60 odd years, and bringing together these brilliant whiskies. And this 10-year-old is just fabulous, just very drinkable, creamy, fudgy, but it's mainly bourbon cask. So there's the vanilla, but there's a toffee element to it, and a nice sort of soft apple sort of style as well. It's very, very nice.
Very nice.
So if you've not seen the film, have a look for Dennis Malcolm. I think it's on YouTube. Dennis Malcolm with Whiskey Magazine. Fabulous film about the wonderful man.
And of course, Benriach, we had a nice interview with your friend from Benriach in the Highlander Inn 9:30 on a Saturday night at the end of the Speyside Festival.
We did. Dougie Cook. Yes, Dougie or Douglas is the sort of advocacy manager there, and we did have that was a couple of episodes back. That was good fun. He was on good fun. I think he was in the last. He just finished his last tastings of Spirit of Speyside, so he was in good fun.
I'll have to ask him how the fish and chips was in the Highlander.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
Gordon, at the start of every episode, that when we're not out and about, look at some of the news items in the world of whiskey. Now, this is beginning of June 2022. Anything it's caught your eye?
Yeah, I mean, a little bit. I mean, I think I was reading an article that I think you've picked up on this article as well, that it is a great time to be drinking brown spirits. I think that they're more popular than they ever have done. And having just come back from America, the popularity of small batch bourbons, which is unbelievable, is really, really taken off. And it's got more people into bourbon. They're not all going to survive, unfortunately, just the nature of the way the industry works and the way that whiskey industry is structured in terms of money and returns, etc. But ultimately, it's great to see, as more and more people come into the whiskey category, we now know more that people move around it from bourbons to scotches and vice versa, etc., etc. So, and then even on a wider appeal, we see the distilleries in China and India and all over the place. So that's all fabulous. And so it's great to hear the rising popularity of Scotch. You picked up on that as well, didn't you?
Well, and I don't think during lockdown, if anything, it went up again, but it really is moving up another level. And again, the popularity down to just so much out there and so many different categories of whiskey, not just Scotch. It seems to be going 10 to the dozen, as they say in this country. Gordon, there's also another story that 5'11". I'm afraid
you're not 5'11".
No, I'm not 5'11", but I think one of the largest bottles ever built or assembled or produced went on auction and has sold for over $1 million. Well, I think it's $1.3 million. A 5'11" Macallan. Did you see that story?
I did see it. I've not really studied it, but I did see it, and I was like, £1.1 million for a 5'11" bottle of Macallan. It's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money. And while I was on that story, but I worked out and I realised, and I've got in touch with the powers that be at Glengoyne, we hold a world records. I heard of this because I've been one or two of the archives.
Are we a world record holder?
What do you think we are world record holders in, Gordon?
Surely it's got to be in whiskey something. Is it the slowest distillation.
You would a good suggestion, but no, actually, that the Great Glengoyne Ceilidh was held on the 17th of June 1997, simultaneously at venues throughout Scotland, and involved 6,568 people. That is a world record. And I thought, what? That was a piece in the archives. So I went to the Guinness Book of World Records, and it's still there. If you go,
did Norris McWhirter turn up?
I don't think so.
And that was in when?
1997. It's the 25th
so
anniversary.
Technically, even before Ian MacLeod owned Glengoyne.
That's correct. I will try and track down people from Edinburgh. And I looked up other whiskey records on the Guinness Book of World Records. The oldest whiskey is the Baker's Pure Rye whiskey, distilled in 1847 and owned by a guy called Adam blah, 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 blah. 1847. Wow.
That's quite a long time ago.
So that is the largest bottle, held 311 litres, the one just sold. And Gordon, I think we can do this. The largest whiskey tasting event.
Mm-hmm.
How many?
They're not Brookladdy.
That was
2,400 or something.
2,283.
Right, we can beat that.
I think we can beat that.
We can beat that.
I think
the biggest audience for a whiskey podcast. No, we might not get that. That's very interesting.
So that's a world records. I didn't know that. All stemmed from the Macallan bottle to Glengoyne to these other records. But yeah. And interesting enough, about the biggest whiskey tasting wasn't even in Scotland, in Sweden. So good. Well done to them.
Those Swedes.
I think
they're very good at that.
Now, Gordon, I suppose the biggest news of last week and around the world was the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, 70 years on the throne. And I thought, 70 years? If we'd got this together and we weren't travelling, we should have done this before the Jubilee, but 70 years could we put together, just as a bit of fun, to doff the cap to the Queen, 70 years of whiskey to celebrate the 70 years on the throne. For example, I'm drinking a Benriach 12. There's 12 years. Could I give you that?
Yeah.
We might not get 12. Should have went for even numbers, but there's a 12 years.
Benriach 12. Okay. I'm going to go for a whiskey that was released, I think it was online actually, for Amazon by a brand, Bowmore, and it was a 9-year-old.
Oh, a Bowmore 9. What was that like, Gordon? Do you remember?
Very nice for a 9-year-old whiskey. Very nice.
Okay, that's 21. I, in a previous episode, I've still got it here, had a Teeling 13-year-old. Remember, it's a single grain and a red wine cask finish. So that's 21 we've got, plus the Teeling takes us up to 34 years. Gordon.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, I could nail this in one go, but I'm not going to.
I need to get, can you get?
I can nail it. I can nail it in one go.
Oh, well, let's do that.
The Glengoyne family cask that came out last year, 36-year-old Bish Bash Bosh.
Wow, 70 years. Play that at home, folks.
I think the way we should do it is you try and not be the person that puts the last number in.
That was very good though. 36 years.
Very good. That's a good game. I think we can develop that. I like that.
Yeah, I like
that.
Okay. Another little challenge. It's quite nice to do, and I think it's quite nice. Even summer and is upon us, and people are traveling. We called it whiskey tripping, but I think we should call this new section, "You have reached your whiskey destination." You know, it's a travel guide, and all these websites tell you contact us, come visit us, and every website has directions of how to get there. And I just thought, what a good game. So we've done it a few times. Gordon,
it's a great game. Well, I'll start. You are in Glasgow.
Yes.
And you are you're gonna take you're heading out of Glasgow on the A82. Okay.
Yes. Yeah, I know that.
Heading
very well.
westwards. Heading westwards. You're gonna pass through Dumbarton, famous for lots of warehousing for the old Chivas brands in Dumbarton. Used to be protected by geese.
That's right.
You'll be going past Little Mill at Bowling,
Right.
where Little Mill was located. You'll be going past Loch Lomond Distillery in Alexandria, going past the famous Cameron House.
Yes.
Still on the A82, heading north now. You'll get to Tarbert. You'll head over to Arica. And now you're going to continue through the rest of me. Thankful on the A82, you're going to head southwest.
Southwest.
You're going to continue southwest down the Mull of Kintyre. You're going to continue down there for about 50 miles, where you're going to get a ferry. And you're going to get a ferry for 2.5 hours. Calmac Ferry. It might turn up. You never know. It might not turn up. You're going to get off, and you're going to get off at one of the ports. You're going to head west, and you're going to head on the A846, and you're going to head down that road for about 12 miles. You're then going to peel off that road, and you're going to go on to the A847, again heading west. You're going to continue along that road for a further about 8 miles, maybe 6, and then you're going to take the B8018, and you're going to go along there for about 2.5 miles, and you're going to arrive at your destination, your whiskey destination.
Oh, I love it. You've got the catchphrase going already. You have
arrived. Where the heck have you ended up?
You have taken me to Kinnacraig, then on across to Isla, which was 2 hours, and I was following you quite well, going up Isla, and I thought you were heading to Bowmore because you've mentioned it 2 or 3 times.
Yep.
But then I think you went more west, and I thought I think you've headed more west. So I think you're either Braclady or Kilhoman, and I'm going to say Kilhoman.
Hey!
Yes! Yes! The furthest west on Isla.
Yes, well done. Right, your turn.
Okay, this is play this at home, folks. Nobody's playing it at home. Just don't turn it off. No, I'm just joking. Right, Gordon, I'm in Glasgow as well.
Okay.
And I'd like you to take the M8. Now, for those of you that are not familiar with Glasgow, and we have many international visitors, the M8 is a 4-lane highway that was put through the middle of Glasgow in the 1960s. Why have a nice city when you can put a 4-lane highway through it? So wonderful. Displaced people.
Great idea.
So
It's permanently got roadworks and permanently got cars on it.
Yes, that's right.
Nah, it's great.
Who wants a city to get it halved in two with a 4-lane highway right through? Anyway, that was the 1960s. You're going to take the M80. You're heading north out of the M80. Keep on going to the A90. Now, you could go left, you could go straight on to Perth. You're going to take the A90, heading to Dundee. You're going to hit Dundee, the land of the roundabouts. Although I have got a family from Dundee, and they call roundabouts circles. You're going to head up through many, many circles and find yourself on the A92 heading north. You'll see a signpost for the legendary golf course of Carnoustie. Keep on going. Eventually, at a circle, you'll take the first exit onto Montrose Road, A92. Turn left, then left again, and you have reached your whiskey destination.
Oh, I think it has to be Becky.
Oh, you correct. What gave it away?
Well, I know they're in that part of the world, and I was struggling because I know that it's the only whiskey place that's really in that part of the world. Yeah. You've got, I mean, if you were going to go further north, you've got Feddercairn, and a bit further west of that, you've got Glencadam, but it's the only one that was there. So yeah, good, nice, and doing really good stuff. The Sterling brothers.
Yeah. They seem to be doing, again, it's that story from farmer to distiller, which has been the story of distillation. Really, they're just following an age-old path.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. No, it's great. And they really have taken it on, and they've done a really good job. So full marks to them. So that's great. Fantastic. That's brilliant. Good. I do like that game.
That's a very good game. And I feel that I've got one more. This it's almost a theme, this episode of challenges. I have one more.
You love a challenge. A challenge.
I have one more.
What's the final one?
This is the name behind the names. I like my history, but to keep the knowledge in your head, I've got to reread books. And at the moment, I'm rereading Richard Patterson, The Nose, the man who's a third-generation master blender, famous for White Mackay, master blender, and the Dalmore.
Yeah, absolutely. And also involved in Wolf Craig as well.
Yes.
So, yes, Richard's a good friend of mine. I haven't seen him for a while. But he's, that guy's a legend. And one of those guys that just, when you go to one of his tastings, you don't forget you've been at one of his tastings. His
colleague, Greg Glass, who will have to get on the show.
We do have to get Greg Glass on the show.
Did actually, and if he's listening, Greg, which...
Does he listen to the show?
Oh, yes, religiously.
Avidly. Yeah, right. And, well, he'll be a bit like you, I would imagine. He doesn't want to lose any whiskey knowledge, so he's just re-listening all of Whiskey Unscripted. Do you think that's what people do?
Invited us to the blending room of Richard Patterson's in Glasgow, and
we should go.
I would love. Well, I enjoyed his book the first time round. I enjoyed his book the second time rounds. He starts a lot. His real education was in Campbeltown, which I know you're going to speak of with Becky Paskin, which I thought was very interesting interview. So I've listened to it, and you do touch upon Campbeltown and how it was the whiskey city for many a year.
Absolutely. And there's a resurgence in Campbeltown whiskies, which is great to hear.
So that was that. And then he worked for a company called J.A. Gillis, and he moved out of Campbeltown. Bright Lights were calling back to Glasgow to join White Mackay. And for some reason, I was reading the book, I thought, Gordon, White Mackay were people with real names. So this might be tenuous, but I just thought, they had names. What is the name behind the name? Gordon Dundas, Mr. White, and Mr. Mackay. Do you know their forenames?
I've got absolutely no idea. Okay,
we'll come back to that. Also, on what's behind the name, Berry Brothers and Rudd. Mr. Berry had a name. He was very famous in going across to the Bahamas in the early 20s and realizing that the Americans wanted lighter whiskey, come back and got the Cutty Sark brand up and running. Berry, Mr. Berry.
Stuart.
St. Francis Berry. Francis Berry, Brother and Rudd. Teachers was a big brand.
Teachers was a great brand. And I can tell you a little bit about Teachers, because Teachers is similar to Lang Brothers in a way. They were producers of whiskey with it. They had a very famous office in St. Enoch Square in Glasgow. And they built a distillery up in the Highlands, up near sort of not technically Speyside, but they built a distillery that's owned by Beam Suntory called Ardmore, which is a lightly peated Highland distillery. Now that distillery was named after Ardmore Point, from near where I live in Helensburgh, which is where the Teacher family had a house. So that's where the name came from. Was it William Teacher?
Boom, boom. Yes, William Teacher. But my point being, we have these names that are almost legendary, as they've transcended the family to become a brand. And it was just a way of looking back and realizing it was a family. And
Langs is another one, which obviously is related to us.
Yes.
And the Lang brothers was Lang's produced banana rum, which we produce now. Lang's banana rum, brilliant product.
Oh, yes.
So we produce under that name. We've got a Lang's brand as well. And if you want to find any more about that brand, you can find it on our Ian McLeod website. But it's, Lang's Supreme was the whiskey of the West Coast. It was your Glasgow, a bit like White Mackay to a certain extent, was your blended whiskey. Used to sponsor snooker and things like that in the 80s. And I remember going to a snooker tournament with Lang's, sponsored by Lang's. And, these are really important names. And it was mentioned a little bit in the previous interview with Chris in our last, the people that have been part of these brands and the people that have really made these brands legendary. A lot of them and a lot of the stories will dissipate out of the industry.
Correct.
And we've got to keep these stories together. So I'm a great believer that things like, obviously the ones we've mentioned, it's really important to keep the stories of how these brands were created alive.
It is, you're absolutely right, Gordon. I think that will be the feature of Chris's article. As he said in the podcast, that's going to be this month's article in the magazine.
Yeah.
Changing of the Guard. And we don't watch it. We don't record these people. These stories will just become second, third, fourth hand, and we won't.
Totally.
Like William Teacher, for example, the story there, his grandson, William Bergius, in 1913, created the removable cork stopper, which 11 years later, Stuart's Cream of the Barley put on the bottle. And was the first.
It's Cream of the Barley.
Was the first bottle to have a stopper you could take off and put back in again. So,
and then you look at names like Bailey Nickel Jarvie. That's a famous whiskey from, many years ago. Bailey Nickel and who are these guys? I don't know who they were.
Yeah.
But there was a whiskey called BNJ, Bailey Nickel and Garvey. I've got a bottle of it actually with a broken cork. But it's a whiskey which was literally, the label was done like it was. It was literally written. It was a really bad label, but the whiskey was great, and that's why it had a real following. I think it was ultimately owned by Glenmorangie. I might be wrong with that. Well, who were Bailey, who were Nickel, and who were Jarvie? There's a whole load of other whiskies like this.
Well, Jameson's. That's Irish. It's just a Leviathan in Ireland. Jameson's, John Jameson. So in Ballantyne's, you've mentioned in Dumbarton, you were driving down Ballantyne.
Yeah, absolutely.
He was George Ballantyne. Bells, Gordon. It's a massive.
Bells. What does Bells mean? What's that about?
It's a family. And the chap, the person behind Bells was Mr. Arthur Bell. Boom. We'll maybe get into all these stories, but I just think it's worth, again, taking time to realise these are people and families. And finally, and I would be a wee bit pushed myself, but Chivas brothers, you mentioned about the French and Pernod Ricard and the Chivas, they're running Glenlivet at the moment. Gordon, Chivas, massive company.
Scapa, a whiskey they should do more with.
Yes.
They've got they're investing heavily in Speyside whiskies. So they're spending a lot more, time at, on Speyside whiskies. So a company that's investing heavily, but yeah, there's some amazing stories from those distilleries.
And the Chivas brothers, two guys, two grocers from Aberdeen, John and James.
Yeah, and then you look at, I mean, I don't know the full story of all of these, but yeah, you look at even across the pond and look at things like, you know, Booker's, Baker's, Basil Hayden's, you know, all these type of things. There's names everywhere, and the history of these are really, really important. So it's a great thing to look at, and hugely, hugely interesting. Fantastic.
Yeah. So just a little bit, just it got me thinking there, just some of the names behind the big brands. And we did mention earlier on about the Richard Patterson really not quite starting his career in Campbeltown, but that's really where his knowledge really began to coalesce and form in the warehouses of Campbeltown. And amazing. And that is a story of what you and Becky talk about. So you may want to tee it up, Gordon.
Well, look, I mean, I've been looking to get Becky on for a long time because I love what she's trying to do and has done in this industry. And she's a lady who's determined to make this industry change, and I like that. And I think it's we you know, us at Ian McLeod, we do and have a lot of good things going on in our business in terms of the people coming through, irrespective of whether they're male or female. That's good to see. But Becky knows that that's not always the case, and around the industry there's more to do. And so I wanted to get her on to just get her perspective on the industry. And I know that she'd also just been traveling around a little bit. So I think she just wanted to come on and just talk about what she's been up to. So I'm now joined on Whiskey Unscripted by Becky Paskin, world famous whiskey writer, contributor, scotchwhiskey.com, and the magical Our Whiskey, which I love what you're doing with Our Whiskey and all the elements and different parts that you put to it. So Becky, how is life with you?
Hi, Gordon. I'm good, thank you. I'm down here on the south coast in Brighton, just looking out the window at the grey, miserable day, and the fact that my cat has come in from the garden soaking wet, which is probably detail you don't want, but she's sat on the table in front of us right now, nuzzling me, which is brilliant because now I'm soaking wet. But all's good. Yeah, Our Whiskey is doing brilliantly too. It's great.
You've been really busy though. You've been out and about, and you've been all over the place. Just back from Campbeltown. Oh, lots of things going on.
Campbeltown was amazing. You know, it's what's so cool about that town region. It's weird that one town is classified as a region of Scotch whisky, but it's such a fascinating place with such an interesting history. And if anyone listening isn't aware of Campbeltown's history as, you know, it used to be the epicenter of whiskey production in Scotland. There was 30 odd distilleries in the 1800s. Now we're down to just 3, but with 2 more on the horizon. So there's at least 2 in planning, and I hear rumours of more potentially coming in. So we may see a Campbeltown resurgence on the cards, which is super exciting. But I think this is a region which is totally underrepresented. You know, it's got this classic fruity, oily, maritime style of spirit, which you just don't really get anywhere else. And now that I do think that, you know, one of the reasons that Campbeltown fell out of favour is because it was a style of whiskey that just wasn't really wanted for blending purposes. You know, the blenders wanted the lighter Speyside and lowland style of whiskey, something that would appease the English palate. So a lot of those distilleries, there were lots of reasons behind it, but a lot of those distilleries closed. But I do think now, with single malt becoming so popular, that big, oily, maritime character is something that's in high demand now, because it's really ticking those boxes for the big flavours that whiskey lovers are after right now. So yeah, all power to Campbeltown. Sorry, I've really gone on about Campbeltown. Campbeltown was amazing. It's such a nice place, and it's so good to see the funding really going into that town and seeing it develop in a way. So yeah,
absolutely. And for those who don't know, obviously the two big brands there obviously are Glen Scotia and Springbank, which if you can come across a bottle of Springbank, you're doing very well, I think, ultimately, because you can't get a bottle of Springbank for love nor money certainly where I was in the US, there's none. So I know Springbank, obviously very popular. And so Campbeltown does a little festival just ahead of the Islay Whiskey Festival. Is that not correct?
Yeah, that's right. So they have, I think it's 2 or 3 days. So Glen Scotia has an open day, and then everyone goes over the road up to Springbank for the day. And I think Cadenheads has a day. So Cadenheads is the same company as Springbank, but obviously it's an independent bottler. That's where they're rooted. They're based in Campbeltown. So they all have an open day. So I was working for Glen Scotia this festival, and put on a series of masterclasses called the Whisky Experiment, which was a lot of fun. Hilarious.
Yeah, that wasn't traditional.
It was not traditional. Anyone who knows me knows I don't really go in too much for tradition. I like to shake it up a bit. But it was really designed around looking at how our surroundings impact our perception of flavour. So we took one of the warehouses, fitted it out like a living room. We put couches and rugs down and lamps, and we hung paintings everywhere. And as people came in and sat down, we tasted a couple of whiskies, and then we altered the environment to pull out different flavours in the whiskey through interesting means, so through lighting and shape and sound. And it really does. It's amazing how much light or colour, or even looking at shape, will change your perception of the flavour of the whiskey in your glass. And we're not changing the whiskey. The whiskey is the same. It's your brain that changes. So we were fucking with people's minds. I don't know if I'm allowed to swear on a podcast, but I just did. So you can bleep it out if you like. But we are messing with people's minds to really extract different, or to nudge whiskey flavour in a different direction, which is hilarious, absolutely brilliant. And one of the days was my birthday, and so we ended up finishing the last session with a impromptu silent disco in the warehouse, which is brilliant fun.
Fantastic.
Excellent festival. So if you've not been, if people haven't been to Campbeltown Whiskey Festival before, then definitely go and have a look, because it's an exciting region. They do both Springbank and Glen Scotia do some brilliant stuff. So
and it's pretty much, and geography wise, it's pretty much on the way to Islay. I mean, you've got to take a little bit of a detour, but you're on the way to the ferry if you're going to go to Islay. So just go a couple of days early and go to Campbeltown and have a look at those two wonderful distilleries, and there'll be more distilleries there very shortly.
100%. But my advice would be, if you did want to do Campbeltown Festival, once the dates are announced, book your accommodation immediately, because they are very sparse on hotel rooms.
There's not a lot of options in Campbeltown. That is very true.
Or take a tent.
You could do that. In May, you should be okay, but you never know. It's Scotland, remember. So, Becky, you've been in the whiskey industry for how long now? You sort of working in whiskey for how long?
I mean, spirits. I mean, writing about spirits, drinks, I guess 15 years or so. I mean, I was. If you want to add on the fact I was a bartender before I became a journalist, then we're.
Where were you a bartender?
But I mean, I bartended for a while, and then trained to be a journalist and started writing about the hospitality industry. Became editor of the Spirits Business magazine, which is a international trade title, and then moved to become editor of ScotchWhiskey.com in 2015. Was there for 4 years, working with Dave Broom and Richard Woodard on that title, which I think really set the standard. And I don't want, I'm not patting my own back here, but it really did set the standard for. I
simply could not agree more. It was an amazing website, and a lot of it's still online, actually. So
it's all online.
It's still all online.
Yeah, and it's like a museum now. It's you can go and look and ooh at some of the pages and look at how dusty and out of date a lot of those Wikipedia pages are, which makes me really sad, because the whole Wikipedia element was my baby, really. I worked very hard to curate all of those pages, a lot of the research, the hard research that went into establishing all of those facts and dates, and the distillery facts as well, so how many stills every distillery has and what their
type of barley they use.
Exactly, like all of those elements. It was a lot of work, and a lot is out of date now, sadly. So I think if there's one thing they could do with it, and obviously I'm not partial to this anymore, but they could just update that, I'd be really happy. So I was with scotchwhiskey.com for 4 years. It closed in November 2019. So just before the pandemic, and it was at that point I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. I was still writing and doing bits and pieces, but I'd also founded a movement called Our Whisky, which is basically designed to challenge misconceptions around who drinks whiskey, how whiskey should be drunk, to really make whiskey, showcase how inclusive whiskey should be and how it can be. And when the pandemic started, I thought, well, let's do something to bring people together. And I don't know whether you got involved in this actually, Gordon, or not. My memory is really bad. But at the start of the pandemic, so March 2020, when things were just starting to kick off, I thought, let's launch an online whiskey festival under the Our Whisky name, and we'll send tasting packs out to people and do live virtual tastings. Now we're very familiar with that concept and everybody's doing it. But at the time, can you believe no one had done that before? I was the first. That
is unbelievable.
Which is crazy to think of now. And I tell you, the logistics to when the couriers weren't working, Royal Mail wasn't working, we thought the world was coming to an end.
You were swimming in boxes and little sample bottles.
I know. I was getting all of the miniatures bottled in Scotland. Luckily, I found a bottler who was still working. They would send them all down to me. And in my 1-bedroom flat in Brighton, I moved all the furniture in my living room to the side and laid out all the boxes, and I packed each one of those individually.
That's commitment.
It was
brilliant.
But we raised, so the first year we ran that, we raised £12,000 for the Drinks Trust charity, and then the second year we did it twice, raised 13,000, so 25 grand in total for charity. So
Fabulous.
Thank you to everyone who supported that, because it was me doing a lot of packing with some of my friends as well, who were lured in by pizza and beer. But there were a lot of people. There were a lot of people who helped with that. All the brands that supported, all the people who bought tickets, because all of that money went to those in the hospitality industry who were struggling. And
absolutely, yeah.
It was really good to raise that amount of money. And so off the back of that, I kind of thought, well, I want to do something more with Our Whisky. Let's turn it into something meaningful. And I always knew that, diversity in the whiskey industry is an issue that has been growing in visibility over the last few years. I think you'll agree. So it's something that's always been very important to me as a woman working in the whiskey industry, and often being at press launches and things, the only woman in the room quite often. I wanted to try and address this issue of the lack of diversity or lack of visibility, particularly of women in the industry. So I split Our Whisky in two. In March 2022, Our Whisky we launched as a subscription club, and we are a fun, accessible, educational subscription club. We send out samples of whiskey to households all across the UK. The boxes fit right through the letterbox. One of my missives for the subscription club is, we do not like the colour brown. So even though the box itself is black, everything else is a bright colour. So we've got oranges and yellows and pinks and purples, and it's just making whiskey more fun and colourful, which is exactly what the industry is and exactly what the liquid is too. So we wanted to really represent that through our tastings. So we have 2 whiskies every month. You get sent 2 50ml samples. They're sizable samples. Proper samples. You can share them with your loved ones or your friends, or you can have the whole lot to yourself, or you can have some that evening and then come back to it later. You've got enough there to get your lips around. We give you cocktail suggestions, so you can have a taste and then go and try it in a cocktail. There's enough there to do that with. And then they are also accompanied by a live tasting as well with the whiskey makers. So you've got a really good chance to taste the whiskey and learn about it alongside the people who've actually made that liquid. And, it's a very rare opportunity. You get a chance for that. And it's only 14 quid a month.
That's great, isn't it?
Yeah, £14 for what is essentially 4 drams, which is nothing, I think.
That is nothing. That is nothing. So everybody, onto Our Whisky and subscribe to that. That's an absolute deal.
So I said that Our Whisky is split in two, and the other half, which is a very personal passion project of mine, is I launched the Our Whisky Foundation. So this is a non-profit organisation designed to support, recognise and empower women working in the global whisky industry. We do that through mentorship schemes. We are launching a funding for qualifications. We'll have awards as well. So we'll be looking at diversity and inclusion policies and marketing strategies that are inclusive, and really highlighting the work of the many amazing women in our industry who do incredible jobs day in, day out, but are very rarely recognised in industry awards. We're there to support women. We're there to support companies, and really just to be a force for good to try and tackle this lack of visibility of women in the whisky industry, and just to support everybody as we're sort of moving forward in this journey.
Have you? I mean, I'm intrigued by this because it's obviously and it's something I can't support enough of. But is it something that have you seen a progression? Have you seen an improvement, but still nowhere where it should be?
Massive improvement. I mean, Gordon, when I founded Our Whisky in 2018 with Georgie Bell, who works with Bacardi. She works on the malts team there. She's no longer with Our Whisky now, but when we did first launch it, we were invited to conferences to give talks about the importance of inclusion in whisky, and we witnessed, half a room of people stand up and walk out because they weren't interested in hearing about women in whisky. People were bored of the conversation. We were getting people's eyes glaze over when we were raising the subject of how we need to include more women in whisky marketing. If you're not including women in your marketing, you're excluding half of the population from even looking at whisky as something that's for them. You are saying this is only something for men. Why would you do that? As a brand, it makes no financial sense to exclude half of your audience, but also it has a knock-on impact on this perception of whisky as being a man's drink. And so for the women working within the industry, we are constantly being asked, do you actually like whisky then? And that's the question we're asked. I'm asked on a daily basis by taxi drivers, by random friends of friends who don't know me. The second somebody knows that I work in whisky, do you actually like it then? Because the assumption is, as a woman, I shouldn't. And that comes down to a lack of visibility in marketing. So yes, have I seen a difference? Massive. There's now brands are really focusing on making whisky more inclusive, and not just for women, but for everybody. So people of colour, we're seeing more visibility of other minorities within marketing. We're seeing campaigns aimed at younger people too, and not always just throwing cocktails at them, but actually showing neat spirit.
Yeah.
Aimed at younger legal drinking age people as well. So it's really, this term, like the democratization of whiskey, is a real thing. And I know some people are sick of that term, but I really do think whiskey is now on a mission. It really is opening up to a new audience, and in a way it never has done before, which is so exciting.
Totally agree. I mean, it's almost, I think whiskey can't open up enough. And, I get asked as an ambassador, someone who's been in the industry a long time, incessantly, even simple things like, how should I drink my whiskey? It's like, drink it the way you want to drink it. It is a drink for everybody. And nothing annoys me more than when I'm at a show and somebody goes, I used to work for a heavily peated whiskey brand, Lafroig, and people go, they come up and they go, Lafroig, and they go, and maybe the wife's standing there, and I'm like, would you like a Lafroig as well? And this is 5 years ago. I'm sure it's not for her. No, why don't you let her decide if it's for her? I mean, it's just this whole. But we are getting there, I think. But it's got a long way to go, and you know more about it than I do. But it is.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We are getting there, but we do still have a long way to go. And so, there are still some people in the industry maybe listening to this thinking, well, I've never experienced an issue, so it can't possibly exist, or I've never seen a woman in the industry asked if she even likes whiskey. So that I don't, it's probably not as big an issue as Becky's making out. But the thing is, for the people who have to deal with this on a daily basis as part of their jobs, as part of their careers, it is a real issue, and it affects more people than you think. Just because you haven't witnessed it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I have had just recently I conducted I conduct a lot of whiskey tastings, and recently I had a guy stand at the back of the room shouting out sexist comments at me, just random things like, oh, if your picture was on this bottle then it would sell a hell of a lot more, and just making comments about my appearance when I'm there standing speaking to people about whiskey and teaching them. His role was to undermine me and make comments about my appearance and how I should have my photo on a bottle of whiskey, and those things like that. It's difficult enough, and you'll know this, to stand in front of a room full of drunk people to talk to them about whiskey, to keep their minds in the game when there's so much going on. But then to have somebody continuously shout stuff out to you, heckle you, and make comments about your appearance, undermining your authority based on your gender, is so tough. It's so tough. And then you take the example of Julianne Fernandez at Bunnahabhain, who over on just last week had an issue with a guy who was just awful to her after the tape, and made a beeline for her to take her off and picked her out.
Almost avoided the male guys and avoided the males and went for the female. That's unbelievable.
That because it's easy pickings, and it's this sort of thing does happen. These are just two instances, but it's there. Things are changing for the better, and I do believe change is brand led, but I also think it's consumer led too. And the more we have female voices out there, the more that we make it a normal thing that women know about whiskey and talk about whiskey, and fewer people will undermine us.
Absolutely. And the stuff you're doing is fabulous, and we all have to call it out as well when we see it. We have to support our colleagues, call it out, and certainly Ian McLeod, we do have a lot of ladies who are coming through the system, through into blending, into production, which is fabulous. But absolutely we can do more, and that's true with everybody. So
and it's this is something the foundation is working on to really tackle within the trade, but it's also something that the Our Whisky Subscription Club is doing as well. So we promise diversity of liquid and diversity of speakers as well. So I am dedicated to making sure we have incredible, exciting liquid for people to taste, but also that the people representing those whiskies are diverse as well, that they don't all look the same. We need to showcase the industry and the people who make and drink whiskey from the outside, from the inside out. So I'm dedicated to showcasing different people, and I think if we can all bring that into the work that we're doing, especially within our industry, constantly thinking about how can I make this a more equal and inclusive space, the best. If everybody's thinking that way, then the faster we'll reach our goal. I genuinely don't think we're going to get there anytime soon, but things are improving. We are getting there. It's just going to take a bit more time.
Yep, no, I agree with that, and totally admire what you've done and support what you do, and I'm a big fan of what you do, so that's great. And thank you for taking the time to speak to us on our little podcast.
No worries. I'm so excited to be talking, and can't believe that I'm following in the footsteps of William H. Macy, of all people. legend. And I love seeing how your podcast has grown as well. I remember during the latter stages of lockdown, going on my long walks, listening to my podcast, my headphones in, listening to you having a little chat around about whiskey.
Well, I mean, it's just, but I mean, you were saying, you did the first sort of virtual sort of sending out packs and things. I think we're the first podcast done by a producer, which I think is a pretty unique position to be in. And no other producer, I think, that does a podcast like we do. So fabulous. And look, we're really glad to have you on it, and lovely to catch up with you. And we'll hopefully see you somewhere very soon for a whiskey. Somewhere.
I would love that. I would love
Wouldn't that be good?
Soon.
Love to catch up like in a bar.
Real life.
Wouldn't that be great?
Oh, let's just go somewhere and get pissed. That would be amazing.
Yay! Let's do that.
Around.
Fabulous.
Oh, that was superb. Super interview. Really enjoyed that, Gordon.
Yeah, a lady that is doing really good stuff through mentorship, through creating a non-profit for the good of people in the industry is fabulous. And I would absolutely subscribe to the monthly whiskey that you get through your letterbox.
Oh, I know.
Fabulous.
And I have to say, ScotchWhiskey.com, brilliant. I mean, really, everyone involved in that have to be so proud. It's just a shame. Totally. I think it's one of the big, dark days of whiskey. Would that be too much to say? That
No, it was a great resource. It was a great resource. And, I think everybody knew it was a great resource. It was well used. But these things, unfortunately, get to a point where if you want to have the best writers and the best insights, it costs a lot of money, and unfortunately it never really commercially worked, which was a shame. So
something out there with lots of money, it'd be quite nice to get it going again. Gordon, well, we're kind of running out of time, but I'm really conscious we started this because this episode's about features. We've had some great destinations and some of the names behind the big brands, which we need to do more on. But remember, we started the A to Zs.
Oh, yeah. Where are we?
I did go back. I think we're at C, the letter C. So hit the music. And have we got any C's? Now, this is not about brands or about processes, about people. The A to Zs of people in whiskey.
I'm just mentioning people that we know. So I'm going to start with a gentleman that I had the pleasure of meeting in the States, Evan Katanach, famous name. And Evan was really basically inspirational in starting the modern day. But he was like one of the first ever ambassadors and for Diageo and was integral in the Master of Scotch program, which we heard from Marty Duffy in the last, he was a Master of Scotch. There was a team of 15 or 20 ambassadors in the US, and Evan Katanach was at the center of it and was an inspiration to know. Great guy, died about 5 years ago, unfortunately, but a great guy and just someone who I think really helped genuinely make whiskey what it is now in the US in terms of being involved in spreading the word of whiskey. So fabulous to start off with him.
This is exactly what it's for. Got a great shout out there to obviously a great man. Gordon, we've got a bit of a problem. We've got quite a lot of Campbells.
There's a lot of Campbells.
It's Scotland's. It's Scotch.
We've got a lot of Campbells.
I'll just give out a shout to our friend who was the chairman of the Spirit of Speyside Festival, Mr. James Campbell, who I had the very great privilege of dancing a ceilidh with a few weeks ago.
Very nice. Well, then there's, of course, John Campbell, formerly of the P.T. Lefroy and now of Lochlee in near Kilmarnock, a lowland whiskey. I think produced their first bottling earlier this year. I think it came out on Valentine's Day. I think it might have come out on Valentine's Day, which was fabulous. Kirstine Campbell, who obviously is the blender for Macallan. And I also want to give a bit of a shout out to a guy who is doing a bit of an inspirational walk around the UK. He's walking from John O'Groats to Land's End, and it's Fraser Campbell, former ambassador of Bacardi, I think. And Fraser's someone I've known for a while, and he's a great guy, and he's currently walking for, I think it's for multiple sclerosis.
Yes.
For the MS Society, and he's walking from John O'Groats to Land's End.
Good for him. And just a quick couple of history ones. And I actually do think I've not done many Bs, but we'll maybe come back to this. But Cs, we've got to where it all began. For the modern story, it was 1494. Lindores Abbey, Friar or Brother John Cor, C-O-R, was the first written reference to malted barley being used to make aquavitae, the water of life, in that part of Fife at Lindores Abbey. So 1494. And Helen Cumming of Cardew, I think she first started distilling in there 1812, 1811. And our friend Ronnie Cox, now of Berry Brothers, which was mentioned earlier on, is her great grandson or something. So she was doing it like illegally and then became part of the establishment as so
absolutely.
So
Ronnie Cox, absolutely,
and Cor.
Another couple of people that I just wanted to mention, Robin Cooper. So we mentioned Dennis Malcolm earlier of Glen Grant. Robin represents Glen Grant over in the States, doing some great work, and I think was over recently. And a couple of people, Ian Croucher. Ian's a guy who started involved in North Star Spirits, and now aligned with David Stirk, are producing and building a new distillery in Campbeltown.
Just as was
called Del Riata or something. I can't remember the name. Is that not right?
Yeah.
So yeah, there's quite a lot of C's. Not to mention Dougie Cook, of course, who we spoke about earlier. We will have missed many.
I know exactly. If you're a C out there and you're in whiskey, you can always get in touch.
And we'll put you in the next round, which will be 25 episodes from now.
That's right. So I forgot Juliet Buchan and Andy Bell.
Are you going back to B's?
Yes.
What about A's?
Only because Juliet met the Queen. There was a picture on Facebook.
Oh, there was. I saw that. There was.
You see that a few years ago. So
great episode.
Mr. B's, Gordon, we have no time. We have to draw a veil. I'm going to raise my Benriach to you, the 12-year-olds, and have a wee slange. Thank you very much for joining us on the episode, and thanks for listening, folks.
Slange.
Posting ahead on the whiskey trail.